Chapter 12. The Key. That which from self made each mortal self, unto each mortal must be. Thus the key that unlocks the portal to God is thyself. Thou art He. You are God. The veil removed. This is the ineffable secret, the ultimate illumination, the key to peace and power. You are God. If you will accept this towering truth, dare to stand atop this magnificent pinnacle, universal consciousness will be revealed to you from within. God is there. It is He who peers from behind your eyes, who is your own consciousness, who is your very self. You are not just a part of God. You are altogether God, and God is altogether you. Upanishads. The personal self and the ultimate imperishable impersonal self are one. Vedanta. Not a part, not a mode of that, but identically that absolute spirit of the world. Jesus. Who hath seen me hath seen the Father. God is universal subconscious mind, the intelligence that pervades all times and places, the design and ordering consciousness of all things. God becomes things. He becomes all things. He has become you. God is not your body, not your ego, but your sense of being, your I. There is only one I in the universe. The same sense of self is in everyone. It appears to be different in life because it clothes itself in different forms. These forms wither and decay, but the self is always one and indivisible and changeless. Every person that lives, every person that ever will live, every creature and thing are all one in spirit. All are God, and each is altogether God. Each of us is altogether God, because infinite intelligence cannot divide itself. It makes a seeming division in flesh, but never in spirit. For infinity is always one and indivisible. God manifests completely in each thing, and each thing is a manifestation of God's knowledge of Himself. Your consciousness is God's consciousness. Your idea of yourself is God's idea of Himself. The ideas you accept are automatically manifested in life. For what God knows He creates, and what you know is created, for you are God. Universal consciousness. God is consciousness and awareness and order and design and knowledge and intelligence and spirit. He is infinite. He cannot know Himself as infinity, but only by becoming something finite. Thus God seeks to expand His sense of self by becoming things. And each thing says, I am this. What you believe yourself to be is what you believe God to be. The limitations and lacks you impose upon yourself, you impose upon God. No one can possibly believe there is any limitation on God. Thus the magnificent truth that there is no limitation on any man. Through each of us, God attains self-consciousness, and each of us is God incarnate. In our lives, we accept the limitations of the flesh and the inhibitions of the ego, and thus we fall short of God consciousness. We ask ourselves, where have we come from, and where are we going? For we have lost the remembrance of having always been, just as we cannot see that we will always be. The development of our ego thrust upon us a precarious duality of mind, wherein conscious mind overruns universal subconscious mind, and we come to regard ourselves as ego only, instead of universal self which we truly are. How can God possibly be the poor thing that I am? A man will ask himself, identifying himself with ego, and failing to perceive that he is consciousness only. Free yourself from the bonds of the ego, and you will forget the poor thing that you thought you were and become one with God. Illumination. This far you can be guided, but the attainment of enlightenment is yours to achieve alone. Words and logic have never yet provided the great illumination, which must come to each man in his own way. If you will accept with perfect faith the premise that all truth is spiritual, if you will discard the promptings of the ego and the noisy sensual stimuli of the material world, if you will search for revelation at the center of consciousness, then the kingdom of heaven will be yours. Letting go of ego may seem like letting go of life itself, and so it is, even as Jesus said, "Who loses his life shall find it." Illumination, the arrival at God consciousness, the spiritual perception that you are God, will come to you through meditation. As an experience, it is universally the same, but perhaps has never been as well described as by Edward Carpenter. The brain is stilled. It does not cease from its natural and joyful activities, but it ceases from that terrified and joyless quest which was inevitable to it as long as its own existence, its own foundation, its own affiliation to the everlasting being was in question or doubt. The man at last lets thought go. He glides below it into the quiet feeling, the quiet sense of his own identity with the self of other things, of the universe. He glides past the feeling into the very identity itself, where a glorious all-consciousness leaves no room for separate self-thoughts or emotions. He leans back in silence on that inner being and bars off for a time every thought, every movement of the mind, every impulse to action, or whatever in the faintest degree may stand between him and that. And so there comes to him a sense of absolute repose, a consciousness of immense and universal power, such as completely transforms the world for him. All life is changed. He becomes master of his fate. He perceives that all things are hurrying to perform his will. And whatever in that region of inner life he may condescend to desire, that already is shaping itself to utterance and expression in the outer world about him. In such a manner does a man come to the realization that he himself is God. In such a manner he does learn to turn his attention from the material world and originate all things on the plane of mind. By forsaking ego and finding his true self, whatever he thinks, conceives, or desires will manifest in the physical world. He becomes the one doer, the knower, the creator, makes all things from self, is the self of all things. That boundless power, source of every power, manifesting itself as life, entering every heart, living there among the elements, that is self. Upanishads. Find thou but thyself. Though this knowledge is not new, it has been exceedingly rare and held among a very few men. All the ages of life's evolution, up through the slime and mist of a fetid and newly formed earth, have pointed toward it. There is only one consciousness in all things, one consciousness which assumes countless forms in search of ever greater knowledge about itself. The infinite self becomes the finite self. And the day when finite self recognizes itself as infinite self is the day that exposes eternity. This little hour, this little life where we are focused now, is but an instant in the eons of our being. We are that very power that constructed the heavens and the earth. And when we have cast out ego and the limitations of our thinking, the multi-dimensioned heavens are revealed to be in our own souls. We have looked in the mountains, and he has not been there. We have looked on the plain, and he has not been there. We have searched the sea and the air and the earth and the sky, and he has not been there. How should we find him when we looked outside? He dwelt within, was in truth our very selves. But what thing dost thou now looking Godward to cry, I am I, thou art thou. I am low, thou art high. I am thou whom thou seekest to find him. Find thou but thyself, thou art I. Algernon Swinburne. Lock and key. The lock that bars us from the recognition that we are God is the creation of ego in the first memories and inhibitions of conscious mind. This lock may be undone through meditation, through taking unto ourselves universal consciousness, through arrival at the spiritual kingdom of heaven, and the key that unlooses all power is the revelation that each man is God. Mind is consciousness, is intelligence, and there is only one mind, which is the mind of God. All things are made from it, our ideas manifested into form. As ideas change, so does form. But the spirit never changes. It is limitless, one, and changeless. Universal subconscious mind creates in the physical world those ideas that conscious mind adopts as beliefs. We create evil by false thinking, by ideas of lack and limitation and pain and sorrow and disease. Such evil is illusion because it proceeds from the errors of conscious mind and may be banished by donning the mantle of immortal self at the center of consciousness. The physical world is but a tiny extension of a vast spiritual realm. All physical law is subordinate to spiritual law, for the physical world is a secondary chain of effects, while the spiritual world is first cause. When man's consciousness expands beyond ego, beyond conscious mind, beyond the limitations of the prompters, thoughts are immediately manifested on the physical plane. Thought transference, clairvoyance, mental healing, and creativeness are all evidences of the superphysical power of universal subconscious mind. A man adds all things unto himself by taking a position with impregnable faith. Faith moves universal subconscious mind to creation. But it is only the ego that must use faith. When the ego goes and God consciousness comes, thought is immediately followed by the thing, for there remains nothing to overcome. All conceptions of limitation and lack and guilt and pain and shame and remorse are cast out with the ego. Nothing but God remains, and whatever God knows is created. We attract into our lives the physical manifestations of the thoughts we think, and in order to attract good instead of evil, we must learn to control our thinking, to think positively instead of negatively. We must be able to choose good thoughts. If a man thinks only in response to the stimuli of the outer world, he remains ego only, an automaton. But when he originates thoughts at the center of consciousness, he creates his own life in the image of his desires and dons the mantle of immortal self.